Door shut. Right, welcome to episode 3 of the Everybody Hurts podcast. I'm Stephen Bell, and I'm from Fountain Therapy here as a resilience coach and a therapist, and a bit of counselling as well at times. So I'm going to hand you over to Chris.
Hi everybody, I'm Chris Puddy with Fountain Therapy, personal trainer, and also working within the fitness area to promote how health benefits your overall mental health.
Monica Varo from Fountain Therapy, integrative psychotherapist and hypnotherapist, and a lucid dreaming facilitator.
I'm Michelle Ward, and I'm from Fountain Therapy, and I'm a counsellor and child therapist too.
And Phil, if you could introduce us all the way over on the phone.
Yeah, hi, I'm Phil Wayne. I'm part of the team, and I'm a psychotherapist and specialise in areas of addiction and trauma and some systemic family work.
Thank you very much, Joe. Just like episode 1 and 2, we're going to continue our theme this week on complex PTSD. And we're going to obviously discuss openly and honestly Chris's experience, particularly around PTSD, and hopefully open up any stigmas and any questions you have. We do have some questions from the last episode that we'll go through, but obviously we're going to talk to Chris about the treatments he's had and he's experienced since obviously his horrific injuries. So I don't know how you want to start, Chris, with what sort of treatments you had afterwards, whether it's medical or physical. Whatever.
So I think where we got to in the last episode is where we got to in the last episode, we were speaking about the effects that were coming through as a result of the PTSD, and numerous effects. And I spoke about the different way it affected me in terms of hypervigilance, some hyperarousal, and just general everyday activities and how it's affected me in terms of everyday activity. I think when it comes to the point when we talk about the treatment aspects, it really came down to that fact that there is no one size fits all. And I've been fortunate, I think, as you look at it, through the years to have had I've had great therapy, great treatment from numerous providers, whether it be through the neuropsychology, the neurology, the neuropsychiatry, and then all the different elements to do with the mental health aspects. And that's covering, the anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think they all tend to blend into one. And where I was fortunate was that the treatment team worked together, and that made a massive difference. But when it came to the specifically treatment around the complex PTSD, it really was a case of trial and error. And I think one thing I'd really like to put out there, and one thing that really frustrates me when it comes to a lot of what goes on around us, I should say, is that there's this kind of thought process that we're going to have 12 sessions or we're going to have 6 sessions and it's going to be finished. But it doesn't work like that. I wish it was that simple. But the fact is, sometimes, you may get to that end of the 6 sessions or maybe the 12 sessions, even 15. But by that point, you may just be scratching the surface. And unfortunately, we find with a lot of different industries, when we look at how they treat their employees, how they treat their staff, and how they go about providing this support through such things as employee assistance programs, they have a view that we're going to use EMDR, we're going to use CBT, we're going to use talking therapies. But quite often it's a case that we have to use lots and lots of different processes, and I certainly was an example of that. I mean, Phil, from your experience, when we talk about the therapies, do you find you have people using lots of different treatments?
Typically people, fundamentally, we talked about this in the last 2 podcasts, fundamentally I think it's about a relationship with the therapist, and certainly with complex PTSD, you've got this whole issue around some people prefer EMDR, some people prefer trauma-focused CBT, and it may work for people differently. And I remember, Chris, you referred in the last episode to the fact that there were several types of EMDR you tried before you found one that really worked with you. And I think this is always going to be the case, that people will need to explore and find the therapist that works with them in a way that they get on. Because you could be the best therapist in the world, but if the client doesn't get on with you, nothing's going to happen. And so I think the interventions is going to be much more eclectic than one particular thing. There isn't one bullet that resolves PTSD or complex PTSD.
I think that's, I mean, the way you said about when we were talking about the different types of EMDR therapy, that was particularly very interesting for me. And even if I just think back to the last few weeks, as Steve is, and I think Monica is in terms of the NLP side of things, I'm studying that at the moment, and that's something I'm going to be moving down towards. But I've just been doing stuff about representational systems, and it highlighted that particularly in terms of the EMDR. When you think about the first process, it's a case of the visual stimuli of it was a pencil being moved from side to side across my eyes, and then the next stage we went to was the auditory, and it was a sound going from side to side across my ears, and then finally it was much more of a kinesthetic in terms of the way that there's that pulsing between. And I found that taking my hearing out and taking my vision out, it made me feel really uncomfortable. And I've spoken to other people that feel the same, that it's too much. And I understand, we've got to get into that state in which to unlock those areas that are, to expose those traumas. But I found a lot of the time what I needed to do is just have the feeling, feel it in my hands, and almost close my eyes at times, because it becomes too much. And certainly when you start getting to that point where you're unlocking the door on certain elements of trauma, that, it's very, very emotional. And that's where, as Phil was saying, in terms of the relationship really is key. And it took a huge amount of time with Anne first, and then even more so with Kelly, in order to bring that point to where I was comfortable enough to open up to them, and them to recognise actually they can see how my body language is changing, how my shoulders are dropping, and I'm welling up. Because the thing is, with any type of talking therapy, CBT, EMDR, whatever it might be, you're tapping into those raw emotions, and there are going to be lots of peaks and troughs and highs and lows and lots of tears.
I can add to this because over the years, how I usually see my clients is the first session, I always ask them to come and just see how they feel talking to me, because they have to really open up, because I'm going with what they are telling me. So you hold the story for them as a therapist. So the relationship is extremely important, because if they don't feel comfortable with you as a therapist, then they won't tell you probably the whole truth, or they will avoid certain things, and so on. So the relationship is extremely important, like Phil said.
Michelle, would you say that's the same in counselling?
Oh,
as well?
definitely. You have to trust your counsellor to hold you when you're at your weakest and at your most vulnerable. And if you don't have that relationship, then you're not, as you say, going to open up to them, because you don't trust them with your feelings and how you feel.
Or you feel shame or despair, and you can't tell because you don't feel comfortable enough with that person. And also when they say, how many sessions do you think? I don't know. Because, you can't see what's going to happen in the next 6 sessions, for example, right?
Right. So, Monica, Chris already said about how many sessions they were giving, like 6 or 12. Have you ever had any experience of people coming in saying, I need 6, 12 sessions, and then how would you deal with them?
No, I didn't, because they're asking me how many sessions do I think, and I said, well, I don't know, because I'm not you.
I think that's that exact comment, I don't know, I'm not you, is the exact comment that I've heard. And I'll be brutally honest. I mean, all you have to do is ask my wife. I am an incredibly impatient person, and I want the answer, and and all the way through, I remember saying on numerous times, well, how long is it going to take me? When am I going to be ready? When can I move on? When can I step away? And the point is, the way the brain works, the way the mind works, and how we file these things away, sometimes they've laid dormant for years. So once they're reopened, it's going to take a long time to process it. And there is no defined answer. And just because you've put it away for a period of time doesn't mean it's going to stay away forever.
Well, what they usually say, I'm not Freud, so I won't keep you for life.
Yeah, but it's...
But I'm saying usually it's about, as I say, as a rough guide is between 6 and 12 sessions. But I said, depends how you feel, how you work with it. And then in about 6 sessions, we see where you are. And maybe we'll just take a bigger gap between sessions and let you learn how to.
I think from our perspective,
Go it low.
Yeah.
certainly, from our perspective, Steve, in terms of emergency service aspects, I used to find what was one of the most important things was just having that ability to sort of defragment and talk to somebody, and even if it's just talking to other team members, that was a massive thing. And that was when you're feeling alone, and all through this period of time, yes, I had my wife, yes, I had my children, although they were too young for me to speak to. But I didn't want to burden other people. I felt like I was burdening people, telling them about how I felt. And also I thought, I sound like a stuck record. But in that mindset, I sound like a stuck record. It's because I'm talking to my counsellors, I'm talking to my neurologists, neuropsychiatrists, all of those treating professionals. Whereas in some respects, the people I really need to know what's going on is those around me, because they're the ones that are living with me.
I think as you and we both know that obviously the numbers within the police service have gone down so much. The ability to even talk to people now is diminished as well. So,
well, I think we can both talk from the heart when we can say, when you are a leader, particularly in any emergency services, armed forces, or stuff where you're putting your life effectively in the hands of others, one of the most important things, if not the most important things, is the relationships that you form with one another. Because whilst you may be having a cup of tea today, having a prat around and a joke, the next day they may be pulling you back from a violent offender, they may be protecting you from gunfire, they may be pulling you out of a burning building. And that is where, I don't want to just go down the realms of sort of emergency service and armed forces, but it's those environments where you need to know that the person to the side of you has got you covered. And that's why I used to religiously think it's massively important that you take that time before you get even into the station on the way, when you finished a shift or ambulance station, whether it's a fire station, whatever it might be, that you do that process of defragmenting, of letting it all out, because the moment you get through that gate or you go through that door, you've then taken it with you. So you really need to be able to leave it behind, and I think that's a massive issue, that as soon as you've left it, when you then get back into your car and you travel home, it stays with you to home. And then when you get home, can I talk to my wife about it? Should I talk to my wife about it? Can I talk to my friends about it? Should I? Because there's always that element of, well, I don't want to burden them, but I do need to share. Yeah. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
So not that opportunity then to have a debrief at the end of shifts and things?
I think from my personal experience, having left quite recently, there is an inability now to have that same discussion. And it also is that, at what point do I feel that I'm that low that I need that discussion? So you've got to, A, be brave enough to go and mention it. And secondly, have you really got the ability to, when everyone's tired and just want to go home?
But there is also that point of yes, it's not necessarily about trauma. It can literally be the case, oh my God, did you see that idiot? It's not necessarily always about trauma, because even these little things, these little indicators, small incidents build up. Over time they get greater and greater. And if you're not even getting the time to share the good times with your colleagues and the laughs with your colleagues, when it comes to the bad times, it's very difficult to then be able to cope with them.
So with all that building up, and obviously you were going through the treatment as well. Obviously, since the last podcast as well, we've had an email come through, and obviously somebody who's suffering from complex PTSD wanted to know, what have you tried, or what would you be willing to try as a treatment had you had a different type of experience? Is there any other treatments?
So the things that I think would be really important is I always mention, so the reason I'm here effectively is yes, I do the personal training, yes, I do the fitness aspect, but this training the body is actually training the mind. And that's the way I always see it, is yes, you are treating something to help with the mind. So I use my physical training a lot to help me deal with things. But yes, we've spoken about CBT, we've spoken about EMDR, which I think are both fantastic talking therapies. But the thing I never really explored, and it's something I'd hope that you could shed some light on, Monica, is the sleeping, because sleeping was one of the most difficult parts for me. When it came to the last stint before I went off in the end, I was waking up drenched in sweat and recurring thoughts and flashbacks and images that I didn't even realise were images, but there were certain sounds that were taking me back to other experiences. And I never explored anything to do with that. And that's certainly something I would think of. And I think that's a massive part, actually, because if you don't recharge your batteries, and if you're not rested, you're not going to have that ability to deal with what's going on around you.
Well, that's why I became so curious about lucid dreaming and working with lucid dreaming. And Charlie Morley, my trainer, who is amazing, he did a lot of retreats for soldiers with PTSD, and it's very, very successful because it goes hand in hand with research. We have evidence this well, right? So, and also the fact that we sleep 30% of our life and we dream, we all dream, why can't we use it? Because everything we see in our dreams, it's unexpressed emotions from our subconscious mind. So when you have a nightmare, it's or a repetitive dream, or you become lucid, right? When you have PTSD, you can work with that trauma, training your mind to become lucid.
Right. Monica, for those that don't understand lucid,
It's when we all become lucid at one point,
Right.
especially in teenagers. It's quite often, usually we fly when we become lucid. So being lucid in your dream, it's actually that part of your dream when you actually are asleep, you're dreaming,
Right.
but you are awake in your dream and you go, am I dreaming or is this real?
right. And what's it, like Chris has said there, that he hadn't considered, or sorry, had considered it, but hasn't dealt with that bit of dreams. What would you say would be important moving forward? That he goes and gets it looked at, or
Keeping a dream journal,
right,
starting doing reality checks at least 20 times a day when you see something unusual. Am I dreaming? Because in the moment when you dream and you see something unusual, you spot that unusual thing. And if you do a reality check, you go, am I dreaming? Oh, I'm dreaming. What is my dream journal? And you work with that.
I think that's leads me on to the next point I was going to make is, and I've just written down on my pad meditation. Now, I find meditation very, very difficult. Now, that's a combination of factors, but most notably to do with the brain injury, it makes it very hard for me. But meditation isn't necessarily sitting on the floor in a lotus position. There's so much more to it. So I would replace meditation with mindfulness. Now, for me, mindfulness is just understanding what you're doing and why you're doing. I mean, how many times, and I've done it today, I've driven a journey and I don't remember the journey. Not this journey here, I hasten to add, but I've driven journeys and you think, well, did I just pass that or didn't I pass that? And it's understanding what's going on in the moment. Yeah, I remember once being given an exercise to do, and it was handed one small square of chocolate and having to describe how it felt and really take it in and think about it. And that, for me, comes down to the point of when I finally went off, I spent a lot of time doing a lot of the mindfulness and trying to understand why I felt certain ways, but also trying to acknowledge whether things were thoughts or feelings, and just trying to acknowledge that moment. Is this just a thought? Is this an irrational thought? Or do I genuinely, get my words out, genuinely feel like this? So it's understanding why are we doing this? Because sometimes what we need to do is just sort of press the brake pedal, stop, take a breath and understand what's going on.
I can add to that because this is a perfect example. Driving and not realizing, because when people come to see me for hypnotherapy, they freak out. What is hypnosis? Will you make me do something weird? And I say no. The best example is when you go somewhere and you know the way. How many times do you remember crossing the red traffic light or your way home? You just find yourself home and then you think, oh my God, did I press the red traffic light? Did I stop?
Yeah.
Or did I just went through? That's why, because when we actually fall into a state of trance between 6 and 8 times within an hour. We can't be fully alert all the time. The subconscious mind can't deal with that.
I think that's the point.
That's the whole point of being mindful.
We create
to be
all
present.
Because we create all these series of steps, things that we do automatically. Now, I found with the trauma aspect in particular, the way my brain was then wired. Needed to be rewired, needed to find new connections to understand why I'm doing things a certain way. And where certain things were normal, you have to find ways to adapt. You find ways of doing different things. And yes, I mean, from my own perspective, there was a lot of avoidance. There were certain things I avoided, certain things I wouldn't confront. And even now, there's things that I don't like doing, and I purposely won't put myself in that situation. At the end of the day, how many times do you have to touch a hot plate before you realise it's going to burn you and not do it again? It's exactly the same. So there's I couldn't put myself into certain situations anymore, and I recognise that. But it's understanding that that's not failure.
No.
It's a case of, yes, these things have happened, but we find a different way of doing things.
You find the ways that work for you the best.
There's a lot. Sorry, there's one other thing I did want to talk about is grounding. I found grounding helped considerably. So in the end, I had this tiny little stone, and I hadn't done it with my first therapist. I did it with my second one, but it was this small stone, and on the stone, we were doing this in my village. They were doing this thing where you put these rocks around everywhere, and the children exchange them, and they replant them, and everyone's going mad for it. And my son had done one. It had a little penguin on it. It's only tiny, but it was small enough to fit in my hand, small enough to fit in my pocket. And then when I got to the point where things just felt like I was becoming overwhelmed and becoming too much, just holding the rock and thinking about a particular location. For me, that happened to be a place, Dunstable Downs, where gliders hang in the air because it's serene and peaceful. And that then feeling, okay, I'm now in contact. Right, give myself a second, breathe, and think about it. It's just buying that time just to allow the things to lessen.
I think just to sort of finish off, I don't know how Michelle feels about this. Would counselling have helped you at any point, like counselling sessions? I know you've had the therapy sessions. Have you ever considered counselling in any?
Well, all the way through, that's the big part. So I've talked a lot about my counsellors, my therapist. Yes, I did EMDR therapy, but I got to the point with the EMDR therapy that we'd gone for, it was over a year, and then we moved from EMDR into counselling because I got to the point at the year anniversary where we said, right, this is a natural time to stop it. And we did. We stopped for 4 or 5 months, 3 or 4 months in the end. But those familiar feelings kept coming back. And it was just having someone to talk to. So I now have my counsellor. I feel fine at the moment, yet I still see my counsellor. And the way I say is I just call up and say, can I have an MOT? Because that's all it is. And if you think about people in the clinical psychotherapists, counsellors, therapists, they have a clinical supervision, don't they? Yeah. So they have that treatment, that way of talking to someone. And you mentioned it earlier, you hold on to it. So you need to then be able to impart that onto somebody else because otherwise it's going to pull you down. Yeah. Now, it's exactly the same that with myself in terms of the trauma aspects, in terms of stuff that was happening at work. I needed someone just to unload. I just need to unburden myself. Sometimes I don't even realise why I'm going there, but I sit there and think, do I need to say something? Actually, and then, let me just get this one off my chest, and it leads to something else, and it leads to something else, and it's all these pathways. One thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, and then finally, eventually, you get to the root cause and the issue that's actually there, and then you can deal with that one. So yes, counselling, therapy, talking therapy, EMDR, CBT, sleeping therapy. Again, keep mentioning it. There is no one size fits all, and don't be.
Did you have all those therapies one after each other or alongside each other? So
there were certain parts that were combined. So the EMDR was very much when I first started with the first counsellor. Initially, it was just around counselling until my emotions were at a state at which I could deal with doing the EMDR because they were too high to start off with. There was too much going on. I had a lot of physical pain going on at that point, where I really badly injured my arm. I had a radial nerve palsy, so my arm was dropped. And I needed to get past that point, and then we moved on to doing the EMDR. So we did certain bits at certain stages, and if I look back, I can sort of plot a timeline why I did these. So I did this here, I did this bit here, I did this bit here. At the time, it didn't feel like it. To me, it was just the counsellor, the therapist was sitting there and reading what was going on with me. But now, as I look back and I start, from my own sake, for my own education and just a quest for knowledge, I suppose, I start looking at these things thinking, actually, yeah, that makes sense. I now understand why she did that. And there's so many traits of things like, NLP that are in there that, I can see what she was doing that now. I can see why she was doing that. And then even aspects, one of the big phrases in NLP is spot it, you've got it. And I've realised how many times I've seen somebody and I've identified something, but I've identified it because I'm going through it myself. Yeah. It's universal.
Did you want to say something? I think, to be honest, what we want to say, I think from all three of us, obviously, the information you've shared for us has probably been invaluable for anyone else listening. And if this has actually helped anyone else out there, then obviously we'd like to speak to them, get them in touch. Or is there anywhere we can say, anywhere that you would point them to help them, other than maybe their GP, or if they feel like they're struggling?
Well, to be honest, there are a wealth of resources, certainly online. You know, I'd always look for, when someone's in crisis, if they're in that moment and something's really bad, you have always got the emergency services, that if you feel that things have got to that point, you've got the emergency services. Samaritans, fantastic for help. You know, lots and lots of charities around there, and we'll post all those links in the podcast for those charities. But I do have to add one thing, and this is my burning thing that I really need to say, is that just because you feel broken now doesn't mean that you'll always feel broken. And I've posted this numerous times, but you know, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. Sometimes we have to go through the shit to get to the better times. Now, and just because something doesn't work the first time doesn't mean it won't work the second, third, or fourth. And the other thing is, you know, there is no machismo in just bearing it and saying, I'm not going to, I can't share, I can't deal. What we need people to be open, because the more people can be open, the more people can expose and share how they feel, the greater the potential to reduce the stigma, to allow people to talk and allow people to share. Because that's where we need to be. How can we learn? How can we evolve if we don't really understand what's going on around us?
And also, like it or not, we all have emotions.
Yeah.
We can't just keep pretending and wear a different mask that I'm okay.
I think, again, so we do want to thank you, and it's good for you, obviously, to talk about it, but we thank you for sharing everything. And obviously, if anyone wants to get in touch and speak to us at Fountain Therapy, obviously, we will be available. We will continue in the series, and we'll be looking at mental health at work, anxiety and depression, and we look forward to seeing you in the next podcast. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.